community perspectives. With us today, we've got 3 distinguished panelists, 2 in person and 1 online. They're each going to do 15 minutes of PowerPoint presentations to put you to, no, I'm kidding. We want this actually to be highly interactive, lots of back and forth. There'll be initial remarks of 2 to 3 minutes and then right into some questions amongst the panelists. Invite everybody in the audience physically and virtually to jump in at any time, and we'll try and accommodate as many questions as possible. So with quick introductions, to my right is Chris Martin. He's the head of policy innovation at for North America for Access Partnership. Prior to returning to the U.S., Chris helped establish Access Partnership's office in Singapore and headed up the Asia Pacific portfolio. Prior to that, I believe you were with USCIB back in the day, right? Yeah, that's where we first met. So going all the way back, and he's been to far too many IGF meetings that he can remember. To his right, we have Jackie Ruff, who is consulting counsel at Wiley, the law firm, where she provides legal, regulatory, and public policy guidance on international issues impacting telecom, media, technology industries. Prior to Wiley, Jackie was with Verizon Communications for several years, and Jackie's personal record is 11 straight IGFs. And then online, hopefully, we have Timea Suto. I don't know if we can't see her on this screen in here, but I trust she's there. She's the global policy digital lead for the International Chamber of Commerce, and she also heads up the ICC Basis Initiative, which is a focal point within the IGF system for business activity related to the IGF. She previously served on the MAG for the IGF, was on the CSTD working group on enhanced cooperation, and I believe was a participant in at least one of the retreats that was organized by the IGF secretary, talking about how to improve the IGF going forward. So with that, I'll turn to Chris for some brief opening remarks, and then to Jackie, and then to Timea.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Great for ICANN to be hosting this event, pull us all together. I think one of the key questions around the IGF is it serving the interest of its stakeholders? And as I was reflecting on that in the days coming into this event, it got me thinking it's kind of like democracy and capitalism, and what's been said about them. And I say this as a proponent of both those things and multi-stakeholderism, is that in some ways it's the worst system except for all the others. And that's because it's messy and complex, and thus, in some ways, can only really partially serve the interests of everybody at the same time. I think for governments who have been engaged there, they get a high level and neutral platform for engaging a lot of different stakeholders all at once. I think that at the same time, it certainly hasn't perhaps met the interests of those who see it as this potential for a high impact, sort of high, kind of high, as high a value as they think it has its potential to be. And there are others that would love to see it fail, and that it has certainly not done that. There's still an active and I think very vibrant community that engages at IGF, on not just at the sessions themselves every year, but intersessionally. And you see that dynamic of positive and sort of less than sort of interest met for private sector stakeholders as well. You know, you have them there that have wanted to see it also kind of be this high impact engagement forum, and it is a place where a lot of private sector stakeholders can put their views and their positions on internet governance forward. But you see a bifurcation with those who want to see it do that more, and those that still want to have it be this benign pressure valve for further intergovernmental internet governance discussions. And then I think on the civil society side, same thing. You have a partial sort of set of interests met where there's access to governments, private sector, and others in a way that maybe be unavailable on a more regular basis, especially for those stakeholders from smaller countries who are less involved on a day-to-day basis with kind of major powers, but still perhaps a sense that it hasn't lived up to its potential. So, you know, in my view, partially meeting things can be, you can augur that it in some ways has been quite successful in that regard. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Chris. Jackie, you want to share some initial thoughts?
This thing just go on. Am I on? Okay, great. Well, it is great to see everyone. A number of old friends I haven't seen in some time. Gives a sense of continuity. So thank you very much for the invitation on this important issue. I think the focus today, at least from my perspective, is to look at business, private sector as the stakeholder. So I've been reliving those 11 IGFs as I was thinking about this. Where did this issue come up? And so on. I did go, I was to the original, the very first IGF, and then the last one I did was in Guadalajara in 2016. I went to the second WSIS, and then I went to WSIS plus 10. Oftentimes with delegations that were the International Chamber of Commerce or even USCIB. So while I was with Verizon, I was really with industry, right? And I'm still following what's going on with the internet governance model and everything that the ambassador was talking about. That's so incredibly important for us. And that, of course, does envision strong business participation. So we need to figure out how to do that and how to make that work. The private sector, I think, has always demonstrated its relevance to internet governance. If you just think about it for a few minutes, the expertise on technical and policy matters, the investment in technology and networks and insights into achievement of the SDGs, just a pick several that are obviously really important. And as we were preparing for this, we were trying to think of what factors could draw even more of the private sector in to this multi-stakeholder framework we're all trying to work with. And I in my own sense, concluded that saying that businesses will come to an IGF and similar organizations that are relevant to their business priorities. There will always be that. You have to have your rationale that are effective in helping to shape policy and that are, I chose the word welcoming in their processes and structure. And by that, I mean, it's easy, it's transparent, it's inclusive, and so on. So I look forward to talking more about those issues. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. Timea, you want to give us a few initial thoughts?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to ICANN for inviting me to this event today. Oh, there I am. I was worried that you can't see me, but now I can see myself behind you. Thanks, everyone. I'm really sorry not to be there with you in person, but really glad to connect and to be on this panel with some old colleagues, I think. We all have an ICC connection here. Chris mentioned USCIB, which is our US national affiliate. Jackie is one of those giants upon whose shoulders I stand with my work. When I first started at ICC almost 10 years ago, she was one of our most active members. So glad to be with old colleagues here. About the IGF, as Jackie said, ICC was always very involved in the IGF before even it was an IGF when we started with WSIS. And ICC was then the focal point for the industry who came to the World Summit and said, okay, we need to be included in these conversations. We need to be part of internet governance discussions. Let us into those conversations. So ICC was that focal point. And when the WSIS ended, and we came out with the action lines and we came out with the IGF as part of that architecture that WSIS set up, those same members said, okay, industry needs to keep being involved and we need a focal point for that conversation. And that became our ICC Basis project. And through that project, for the past 19 years since we have an IGF, we've been there at every juncture. We've been in almost every MAG in some way, shape, or form, either to our members or to our secretariat. employees. We've been at every IGF annual meeting. We've participated in the intersessional work. So business is there through us, but of course also through their own engagements and through other organizations. Why does business still feel that this is important? And we made a little survey through our members to sort of figure out why industry keeps going back to the IGF and why we feel this is an important place to be. And for Jackie, as you said, for you, this is inclusivity. For us, or welcomingness, if that's a word in English, for us, it's really interaction, right? For what came out from our survey with members was businesses go to the IGF to have those meaningful interactions with governments, with other stakeholders that lead to more informed policy making, to more informed policy decisions. And for that, it is really important for the business community that there is space for this. But there's also a nature of those conversations that are not, a net zero conversations of, I need to win this negotiation to put my position in there, but that really it's an open conversation where we can bring our point of view and listen to others and inform what goes forward. So that non-decision making nature of the IGF, I think, is one important point of why industry comes back. The other one is, and I'll put this in a negative, consider the IGF not being there. Consider the internet governance space without the IGF. How would this look like? So if we look into the value of this multi-stakeholder, open, welcoming interaction that the IGF puts forward, if we remove this from the internet governance space, I think the world would look quite differently. Maybe not in the technical terms, ICANN's remit, that's working very well, but in a number of other fora, we would have very different conversations than the ones that we're having today. So I think we need to consider this also in this point of view. So those two things for why industry is really supporting the IGF so far. And as Chris said, maybe the IGF hasn't lived up to its full potential. I see this somehow as the victim of its own success. There's so many issues that so many stakeholders have brought into the IGF lately that it is just sometimes, as one of my good friends likes to say, is like drinking from a fire hose. So it's very difficult to distill what it is that it's important for you, for your business, for your organization as you go into the IGF and try to take away, because there's just so much happening. So for me, is if we're looking into how to sort of future-proof the business participation, is preserving this interactive, non-decision-making nature, preserving the multi-stakeholder nature, but perhaps work a little bit on making this more digestible, making this a bit more focused and more responsive to the issues that business wants to talk about. So I'll stop it there, and I'll come back to some of these points as we carry on. Jim, back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Timea. So as this is a business-focused track, we've talked a lot about all the other stakeholders that participate, but Chris, for you, from this business perspective, how does participation in the IGF actually translate into tangible benefits for those who do participate?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. I think in a number of ways. First, it's a great clearinghouse for understanding all the different issues that exist around internet governance. To Timea's point, it has really morphed into this pretty massive event of a multiplicity of different issues, ideas, perspectives from all over the world and all different types of actors who can bring their view to the table. And in that sense, I think business can use it to both see what's out there and learn from others, both big business and small business, potentially even especially small business who are interested. We also mentioned the inclusivity aspect of the event. And I do think that there's a convening function that it serves, which is highly valuable to those, especially those who have participated and seen it in action. There's a community that has developed around the IGF over the years I think quite vibrant, dynamic. We talked about the change in generations on the internet governance side. I think you've seen that witnessed at the IGF, like you have at ICANN and other forums. And but that ability to kind of come together, revitalize the conversations with those individuals that may have inspired you or challenged you or challenged your business's position on something, I think is of interest and value to business. And then I think the third sort of tranche of value is driven from actually being able to present your position on an issue and kind of drive it forward across multiple stakeholders simultaneously. There really isn't kind of one single forum that provides that same opportunity that the IGF provides. Now, that being said, I do think there's a challenge for business in making the case internally these days, especially these days. I feel like it's almost more poignant now than it has ever been to show business value from these types of engagements. There's a real challenge in showing anything more than short and medium term value for spending the amount of money and time to engage in these things. And we've seen pullback from various clients and businesses in this vein, not just at IGF, but in a lot of other kind of multilateral engagements and multi-stakeholder engagements. So I think that's a near-term challenge for those of us in the business community to make across our peers and counterparts, and something that I would enjoin everyone to, if you're a supporter of the IGF, continue to make case for it, because it's hard in the business community to make the case.
Yeah, it definitely sure is. And, one of the things too that I talk to my clients about is, if you're going to go to the IGF and you're going to present your message, don't expect a one-way conversation. Thicken the skin, be prepared to take some feedback, not always positive, and build and grow from that. And I've had clients in the past that, walked into the IGF with one thought in mind and walked out with a completely different thought. And that's extremely valuable. And that's something you can't get in your conference rooms, or, that's only the real world feedback you can get in an environment like the IGF. So Jackie, focusing back probably on your time at Verizon, that's, I think, the most relevant. What are some of the tangible benefits you saw from your participation in the IGF?
Well, somehow I ended up in the middle of some of those very interesting conversations you were just talking about, by the way. And I want to say to all the fellow panelists and our chair that I think everybody is presenting really great kind of summaries of what the experiences have been and the value and so on. So to me, it was a forum with all the qualities you've described, where you could really try to help policy move in a positive direction. Now, that was usually challenging. So I remember at the founding Athens meeting, government head of a regulator gave a very passionate speech about how the telephone companies needed to pay them higher termination rates, right? And it was really, really passionate. And so that question of interconnection, right, is a very important one. And over the next period, and maybe even before it, working with the OECD, right, on interconnection and what it should be like, working with actually some of the internet companies about the alternative, which is a movement toward doing commercial arrangements that would be flexible and so on. And really over a couple of years, we did workshops on it, et cetera. I'm not saying we were the only ones that were doing anything, but it was a real tangible, right, that one could go back and talk about as being part of the mission there. And then the cloud services. When cloud services came in, I remember I was in Baku doing a workshop there, and I said, "What do people think about it?" I do this is what it is, right? We get that settled. Then what do people think of it? And one person says, "I think it's terrible," right? Everything's terrible for all these reasons. Another person says, I think it's great. And I said, okay, what am I going to do? So I tried to kind of figure out a middle ground and say it. And I said to myself, that's really exactly what we want to be doing to try to build good policy, and good policy on a multi-stakeholder perspective. And then another one was trade and human rights, and the point that data flows for benefit of commerce and economic growth was very much same data flows for freedom of speech, et cetera, and for human rights. And then my final example was the Internet of Things. Again, just a steady set of year after year trying to talk about these new technologies and what they are and what could be good policy and the value of having a lot of contributions to the multi-stakeholder process. So I think that's a good example. I'm sure people have lots of other policies issues that have been managed in that way.
Great, thank you. So, Chris, you mentioned, the multitude of issues that you'll find in an agenda at the IGF. I mean, it really runs the spectrum. And, all right, maybe last year was the exception with 70% of the panels being on AI. But there are a ton of issues out there that one could go to an IGF and learn about a completely new issue or discuss an issue that's been on the agenda for quite some time. But that can also be daunting. So many sessions, so many conflicts. Timea, you mentioned in your opening remarks about businesses looking to sort of focus on the agenda and really drive into what's going to deliver value for them. So what are some of the improvements that you think could be made to increase business engagement, in light of the fact that particularly for newcomers, and as Chris mentioned, the small and medium enterprises who don't know what the IGF is, maybe showing up for the first time, what are some of the improvements that could be made to foster not only initial participation, but ongoing engagement?
Thanks, Jim. And this is also, I think, to Chris's point of it being increasingly difficult to demonstrate the ROIs to businesses to actually, okay, if you show up, what do you gain from the IGF? And in our experience, to those who are new to the space, to those who are new to the IGF, to those who are new to the concept of multi-stakeholder, I mean, for us, here we wake up in the middle of the night, we know how to spell multi-stakeholderism. This wasn't very easy 10 years ago for me when I started. I had to go and check if it's still a good way to spell it. Businesses don't come to this from this sort of esoteric way of, okay, how do we govern the internet? People come to it because they care about an issue. They care about growing their business online. They care about human rights. They care about whatever issue, new technologies, IoTs, internet connectivity being a barrier to their own businesses, lack of skills. There's a number of issue-based topics that businesses actually care about. We feel it's most appropriate to touch these businesses through these issues that they care about. And here we really fall into what I call the marketing problem of the IGF, because the IGF starts and finishes with the credo of this is a forum that is here to discuss multi-stakeholderism. And it's very difficult to explain what this means to somebody who's new to this space. So we have to be able to articulate that these issues that you care about are actually being decided upon or can be decided upon, or your opinion can be brought into them because multi-stakeholderism exists. So we need to be able to come to an industry player and say, okay, come to this annual event. It's going to focus on 3 key issues, and it's going to talk about this, this, and this. You can come and participate and bring your own opportunities here. It helps with communicating in advance. It helps with linking up with agendas of other fora. It helps with the takeaways as well, because then you can report, and it helps focus the attention of your newcoming speakers, of your newcoming participants. And you get the multi-stakeholderism through living the IGF, through living it either through the intersessional work or being there. So for us who are sort of the multi-stakeholder wonks, it's really easy to come in and discuss, okay, we need the multi-stakeholder space or counterpoint to the entire internet governance space. But to those who are new, you need to get them to this message through meeting them where they are. So I think perhaps this is one issue that the IGF could do a bit better. This marketing and communication about the topics that they're focusing on. So that's just one point in my opinion that hasn't really been considered. The other one is, of course, making the resources available for making this work, and that, in my opinion, also comes with narrowing down the focus and knowing how much you can accomplish with what you have, and on how many topics you can focus, and how many intersessional activities and others you can focus on with the limited resources that we all know that the IGF has at its disposal. So two things there, but perhaps the others have more to add.
Okay, thanks, Timea. So I'll throw one more to the panelists and then give the audience a heads up that we're going to turn to you next. You talked about a little bit there. We all know there's this struggle within the IGF on, is it action oriented or is it just a talk shop? There's been a call over the last several years from governments and that it needs to be more outcome oriented. But Timea, you touched on something that's important. And for those of you who've been in MAG meetings, have heard me say numerous times that the IGF doesn't have an outcome issue. It's got a marketing issue. There are plenty of outcomes that come from the IGF. We just don't know how to tell that story effectively. And we don't know where to point people to find those outcomes. So, I'll throw this one to whoever wants it, from the business perspective, how important are outcomes? Jackie, you talked about some of the benefits you got, but, how important are outcomes versus decision-making capabilities of the IGF to ensure that businesses continue to show up?
Yeah, I'll start that thread in the conversation because it's something that I've always thought, and I like the way you put it, it's a marketing issue. There is a huge amount of material that has been created by the IGF, including in its activities between the actual meetings, right? Because they have working groups, they have policy forums, best practices, and that's all documented and available, right? So if I were, for example, an industry trying to figure out, well, maybe what should we be thinking about with respect to developing countries? We want to be supportive. What are the models that are out there? What are the ideas that are out there? If those materials were packaged in some way, right, I think that would be very valuable for businesses that are particularly trying to get the best possible policies in terms of increasing connectivity in the developing world, or IoT, or all the topics that emerging technology topics have their own groups and their own documentation that there could be some way, I would think, could be made more accessible. So that's a quick thought.
Chris?
Yeah, I agree, Jackie. I mean, I think that type of effort would be highly valuable. The IGF has been doing a ton of stuff that pushes outcomes. You've got the best practices forums and the policy networks. They develop guidance, papers that are presented intersessionally. There's a lot of stuff on the sidelines that happens that people take out and actually action at a national level or regional level. But I do think that there's still this continued question of, is the IGF having the type of action-oriented impact that some would hope? And there have been ideas that have been put forward, some by the business community, some by others, around what that might look like. Whether that's more process-focused initiatives or those more on substance. On the substance side, for example, there's been discussion about focusing it some type of more formal guidance by the group around a particular topic, like interoperable data governance or interoperability around that. There's been on the process side, discussions about new funding mechanisms that could be stood up to galvanize more engagement by stakeholders around the world. There's also been discussion about linking the IGF more formally to some of the other multilateral discussions. So whether that's processes like the GDC that just went through, is there a way to kind of link what's coming out of IGF more formally to those processes? I can say that in kind of reviewing the GDC, there was a specific call on the IGF to inform its implementation. So, there seems to be multilateral appetite for some of that, whether that's, how that's taken forward and implemented, I think is a question. But I think that's another kind of vein to explore. And also to kind of think through how these other governance discussions more broadly, especially around the hot topic of the day in AI, has morphed and sort of changed the debate about the value of governance. And I say that in the sense that a lot of the questions that are coming up during the AI governance debates are new and different than the way that the IGF was structured in the past. A lot of the questions around things like sustainability or these other kind of newer areas, even kind of how you protect data, they weren't envisioned in the same way back in 2005, 2003 that they are today. And even those things that were kind of considered, it's the moment that the global community is reviewing kind of how to govern a thing like AI, I think can also backwards inform how the IGF considers its governance and what types of things might be considered more action-oriented. And I took what Ambassador Lang said earlier too. I think it's a sort of a bi-directional sort of process to sort of see what elements of the IGF, those AI governance conversations can build on. But I think there's also a backwards facing which way can IGF look at what's happening in the AI governance space and consider how it might change or shift what it does for the current moment today.
Thanks, Chris. Timea, anything to add before we go to the audience?
Just one quick note. The problem with being unaware of outputs, and as Jack Kinker said, there's myriads of outputs of the IGF. The problem of being unaware of those outputs is that you cannot turn them into inputs. So that they cannot become an input to other processes, and they cannot become an input to IGF itself. So then you fall into the trap of having that same conversation over and over because you think you need to start anew because you don't know what has happened the year before and the year before. So it comes back to how do we make sure that those outputs that are due produced by the IGF are communicated better, documented better, tagged, grouped, so that somebody who's new goes onto the IGF website or to some sort of repository and figures out, okay, over the past 20 years that we've had an IGF, how does the conversation progress on topic X that I'm interested in? And if I'm able to be aware of all that output, then I can use it as input into my work, into other organizations' work, and into my contribution to the IGF in the next cycle. So perhaps we need to a little bit think about that and into how do we turn these IGF outputs into meaningful input within our own work and for the IGF itself.
Okay, thanks, Timea. I see in the audience we've got 1, 2, 3. Anything online? 4, 5. We're gonna have to make them quick. Steve, we'll go first, and then we'll sort of zigzag around.
Thanks, Jim. Steve Del Bianco. Question with respect to whether the national and regional IGFs have value and viability in drawing business participation into the global IGF. Aside from the not having an IGF USA this year, it has for the past 10 years been a very popular event. We've been able to draw a lot of business and civil society interest. Maybe that translates into attendance at the IGF or appreciation for coming back the year after. But what is the experience of you insiders on whether the national and regional IGFs are a good farm system to create interest and participation? Thank you.
Who wants to take that one?
Steve, I think they are. I feel like a lot of those got hit hard by COVID, right? And it really sort of wiped the slate clean in a way of kind of the traditional convenings that had been really kind of getting going. I know that's the case here. And I can imagine that's replicated in a lot of other national and regional IGFs. But I do think there is a evangelization function, if you want to call it that, that these national gatherings can have. It's a lot easier for folks to get to a DC or a Sao Paulo or, wherever it would be held than it is for them to perhaps go to Baku or, to go to Riyadh. And so I do think that there is a value there. So much of this, though, comes down to individuals, people who care about it in that country, getting engaged, getting involved, kind of, taking the time out of their day to organize an agenda, send it around to a group of stakeholders. I mean, there are a lot of, I think, forums that you can build around those. You got the ISOC communities, you've got others that can be sort of partners in that endeavor. You got the ICANN communities at the national level. And I do think there's value in for kind of coming back to I think there was more enthusiasm for that pre-COVID, and it got hit by the pandemic.
I'm going to turn to Elizabeth for an online question.
The number of IGF dynamic coalitions continues to grow. Currently, there are 32 covering a range of issues and addressing important challenges. Should the IGF's year-round profile be enhanced by formally recognizing and endorsing the outputs of these stakeholder coalitions? And this is a question posed by Mark Carvel.
No. No, I was going to say this is a very current one. I would suggest it. Maybe Timea.
Timea, maybe, yeah. Would you want to take a shot at that one?
Happy to. Thank you. And thanks to Mark for this question. I think one of the success factors of the IGFs is really just seeing the proliferation of the DCs. I think there's been a lot of good work done in these communities on a number of issues that really it's a coalition of the willing coming together and through their own efforts bringing in what they believe on a certain topic, and they do amazing work. However, into turning this coalition of the willing into a formal UN output, that requires a lot of process and resource to get to a point where the UN stamp of approval can be put on something. We all know, those of us who are familiar with UN processes, of how much work goes into that, to ensuring the quality, the inclusivity, the true multi-stakeholder nature of how an output like that is produced and what can be called a UN output. So the question, I think, is not as simple. Should we recognize the great work that they do? Of course we should. They do a lot of good work. But making that an official UN output, that requires, I think, a little bit more thought and a whole lot of resources. And I personally don't believe that the IGF at this moment has the resources it needs to have 32 dynamic coalitions outputs turn into official UN outputs. So for the moment, I think the answer is no.
Great. Thanks, Timea. I see Joe's over here with the mic, so my blind side is covered. Thank you.
Hi, Ashley Heineman with GoDaddy, and I have more of a very embarrassing confession to make with a little bit of a question at the end. So I've never been to an IGF. I've been in this business for quite a while. I spend most of my time at ICANN, and I have to say that that's an environment where people come with very firm positions and they're there to drive them. And it's often really difficult to get to a point of understanding other people's perspectives. And what I've heard Jim say, and I think Chris as well, maybe all of you, is that the IGF is more of an environment where you can discuss issues and try and understand other people's perspectives. I had that a major aha, maybe no duh moment at ICANN when we started putting together more of these sessions that are just to discuss an issue. We're not here to drive towards policy. We're just talking about things. And sometimes it's really frustrating to participants when you do that, because it's like, well, why am I spending my time here? But I'm starting to realize that without that, it's really hard to come to a realistic solution on anything. So my question being, is that a correct observation to be taking away? Do you feel that at the IGF, these sessions are really geared towards getting people to understand each other rather than push an objective? Is it more of a some are, some aren't? I'm still not convinced I'll be able to convince my employer to send me to one of these, but I would love to be able to go and maybe try and build off of what I'm hoping this experience is. Thanks.
So I'll actually take this one. I mean, it's both, actually. It depends on who's organizing the session that you're in. There are definitely sessions that come with agendas, trying to drive towards a conclusion and trying to deliver an outcome. But there are others where it's, I'll sit in a session where I really don't know a lot about an issue. And as you said, it's an exploration of the issue. And the policy geek in me kind of thrives on that because there is not this overhanging need to somehow walk out of the room with a decision or an action item, or it's this way or the other way. So you will find a lot more of the, let's talk about an issue, let's try and understand it from a variety of perspectives, than you will, hey, we've got an agenda and we need to come out of here with something that, we went to the IGF and we came back with 10 principles or something like that. That being said, it is important that the IGF does modernize. As somebody mentioned earlier, it's the 20th anniversary next year. And there do need to be more outputs and outcomes, but not necessarily binding, not necessarily decisional, but records of what is discussed and how it was discussed. And, as we talked about earlier, it's got to be marketed, way better than it ever is. But don't feel as though you're going to walk into a session at the IGF and have to vote on something. That's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen. Let's put it that way. We've got an online with Elizabeth.
There's a question from an anonymous attendee. Will the mandate of IGF be limited to the internet-related policy? Will that include AI and other emerging technologies? Thank you.
Who wants that one?
I mean, I think that, as Jim mentioned, AI is really prominent at last year's IGF. It will remain prominent going forward. It's just a reflection, I think, of the policy environment and around technology that you can't help but bring it in. It doesn't mean it has to be all AI all the time. And I do think as you kind of look at the sessions that are gearing up for Riyadh, it's maybe not so AI dominated as it was. There's kind of there's a lot of additional diversity kind of re-included, but it won't go away. And I really do think that that's okay to have it overlaid. There are lessons to be learned out of what's happening in AI that can be, I think, effectively incorporated into IGF. And it should have a voice on it as the different efforts at the global level, regional level, national level around AI governance proceed. There's also a sense of overwhelming multiplicity around these discussions. But a forum like IGF, I think, has a role to contribute and kind of bring together multiple stakeholders, again, from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and then they can take those back to their own places, whether it's a national conversation, a regional conversation, or a global conversation around AI.
Thanks. Where are you going next, Joe?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, there's been a lot of outcomes from IGF, lots of outcomes, a lot of materials. Doing some research recently, and I saw it a lot. Maybe it's not been properly collated. That could be the issue. Maybe we should be talking more about the IGF library, where you can properly index and new people can get a lot of information, perhaps concerning outcomes and who can access it. Now, in terms of business, how do you justify, business continuous participation? I think we need to remember the pre-WSIS activities, the pre-WSIS scenario, when there were issues around, the IANA and what have you. And businesses in the US, they're actually taking the giant leap forward in terms of commercialization of the internet and new product, new innovation. So the IGF continue to serve as an environment for understanding new issues, policies like AI. Yes, like last year in Japan, I was there, and that was it. Talking of that topic, people were concerned, okay, about it. So it's a global platform for all stakeholders, particularly government, to build their capacity on these new issues. And we have understanding on an equal footing. I think it's very important. And on the basis of that, as long as we are seeing this information society, digital compact is there, IGF will remain relevant, and businesses need to key in, especially those that have idea for new products and new services. But in Japan, I know some organization from Japan itself that came to IGF, organized their own workshop, to present their new products and their opportunity for booths and their ideas, so that global audience can access those products. So that shows that it's really very much relevant. Just making a case.
Great, thanks, Jimson. If you would just pass the microphone, we have time for one more. Rick, we'll give you the last question, then 1 or 2 sentence wrap-ups from our panelists.
Thank you. And I feel like I'm back in 1999 with Marilyn Cade and Sarah Deutsch at the U.S. Chamber talking about how do we get businesses involved in ICANN at the time and then the IGF. And it's always been a struggle. One of the things that is great is that you have the ICC, USCIB, and others who do represent the business community, because it is very hard to get the C-suite to say yes to money. And I almost made the mistake of inviting my boss, because at the time I was working with, I brought David Ferris in from USCIB. And so 2 of us teamed up on my boss and said, you have to come to IGF. And he did come, and he said, I felt like I was in the bar at Star Wars. And we almost lost the ability to go anymore. So sometimes it can be.
Did you take him to the Bali meeting?
Like I say, which one? So that's always going to be a challenge. And I think what Steve brought up is very important, is the IGF USA sides, because small businesses are never going to spend money to go to IGF. That's just the reality. Medium-sized business, not a chance. And larger corporations like News Corp, if you have people who are very passionate about these issues and try to convince. So I think the big thing that we need to do more of to get businesses involved is greater outreach to the business associations to get them to commit. And that's why the ICC and USCIB have been so great. But most American businesses have no idea what those acronyms mean. So following up, I would love to hear from the ICC what you're hearing and from others on the panel.
Well, I would also add AFICTA, who's represented right behind you, engaging private sectors across the continent of Africa, another group that brings a lot of folks to the IGF. So do we want to incorporate that into 1-minute wrap-ups from each of our panelists if we could, so I don't get yelled at for running over? Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, that we're hearing lots of great ideas, I think. Just as an aside, I was thinking about, even for small business, they have associations, right? And from working in the trade sphere at times, I've seen there are so many good business associations around the world. So probably working on some of those. So I think this has been a great session, appreciation of things that the IGF has done, and a kind of a set of materials and ideas that could be used. The question would be now, I think, how can this greater supporters for the IGF try to encourage it in the right direction? And then the big question about what will be the relationship with the IGF and the implementation of the GDC and all of that. So great to have this input, these ideas at this point, and much more to work on collaboratively going forward.
Thanks, Jackie. Chris?
Yeah, I guess in terms of galvanizing engagement for the IGF on the business side is to consider the upcoming Riyadh meeting. And I think there are 2 elements of that are interesting to highlight. One being, this kind of goes to the question that I offered to Ambassador Lang earlier, which was, no one really thinks of Saudi Arabia as a proponent of the multi-stakeholder system, or not traditionally had done so. And I know that there's a lot of consternation in some quarters around its hosting of this year's IGF. But it is a statement by a government to say we're going to do this here, and one that's somewhat unusual, I think a little bit unexpected. And, it speaks to this consolidation of support for multi-stakeholderism around the world that I think is important to continue to galvanize and to push the energy forward for. And the second one is in relation to the implementation of GDC and kind of how it works, especially aligned with the WSIS Plus 20 review next year. The IGF in Riyadh will be the first post summit of the future, post GDC, post HLab, kind of bigger internet governance convening. And it'll be really, I think, an opportunity for a lot of stakeholders to come together and see who's and how people are going to go to bat for WSIS Plus 20. I'll note that, inside GDC, paragraph 68, essentially, as I said, called on IGF and WSIS to identify how these processes and forums can support the contribution of all stakeholders to the implementation of the compact. And I thought it also, for the business community, perhaps somewhat concerning that 11 of the 21 calls to action, like call on in GDC, were particularly focused on the private sector. Some were on social media, some were on digital technology companies. But there is an eye on business. And I think IGF and Riyadh will be an opportunity to really discuss that at some deep depth and length. So it's an important opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Timea, wrap us up.
Yeah, so three things from my end on what we need to focus on. And thank you to Chris and Jackie for this amazing discussion, and to everybody who put questions or shared comments. One is we need to focus on raising awareness that is on us as international business organizations. It's on us as individual businesses, and it's on the IGF itself to explain what this means. Why should businesses come? What do they get if they come? And making the case for what this actually means to that issue that one particular business actually cares about, and how that shapes up into a global, international, multi-stakeholder, multilateral process, and why to engage at that level. That's one. Secondly, we need to focus on marketing what we do better. That is a call to the IGF as well, perhaps also to some of us who are working in this area. Market better, focus the agenda, focus on what this is about, so that businesses can actually, in 1-2 clicks, understand what your event is about and how can they participate. And third, I think it's a lot about managing expectations. It's managing our expectations from the businesses who come, but also managing the expectations of the IGF itself and in the international policy community of who you can meet and what kind of conversations you can and should have at the IGF. The IGF is never going to become, or shouldn't become, the place where we come up with a new treaty on the topic du jour. It's not going to be a place where we've solved an issue from beginning to the end. It's going to be always, and it should remain always, the place where we come together and discuss and all go away more informed, better equipped to actually make those decisions in the appropriate fora. It's also never going to become the place where you're going to meet the next CEO of insert your preferred brand here. It's not the forum where companies will come and talk about the latest technology development in a trade show format, where the new CEO of a new company is going to come and spend a lot of money to be able to showcase their new product. This is a policy conversation that will attract policy experts. So we shouldn't feel that the IGF has failed because it didn't attract the person who you saw on the cover of Forbes yesterday. It's going to be a policy conversation, and it should remain a policy conversation. So we need to perhaps manage the expectations between for the businesses of the IGF and of the international community of what this is about. So I'll just leave you with that.
Thanks, Timea, and thanks to everybody. Lots of great questions, lots of great insights. As always, we ran out of time. I'm sure there's plenty of questions in the audience. I think Jackie and Chris will be here for a little bit if you want to talk to them. So thanks, everyone, for participating. Thanks, Timea, for zooming in with us, and we'll talk to you soon.